My own mother said I'm ashamed you're a waitress, then celebrity. Chef called me genius. What if the person you loved most in the world, the one you thought would always be there for you, told you she was ashamed of who you had become? Hey, my name is Charlotte. I never thought I would be betrayed by someone I loved, especially not in front of so many people. It wasn't just the sharp words my mother threw at me, the ones that pierced through my chest like daggers. No, it was the look in her eyes, the disappointment, the shame, the judgment. It was as if she had watched me fail in front of her and couldn't even look at me the same way afterward. You could have been so much more, she had said, her voice trembling with disgust. I'm ashamed. You're a waitress. You deserve better than this. The words still ring in my ears, even now, years later, but it wasn't just the sting of the insult. It was the way everyone around me reacted, the awkward silence that followed, the whispers, the side glances. I could feel their eyes on me, like I was nothing more than a disappointment, a mistake. I had been working at the same small diner for years, scraping by on tips, keeping my head low and my dreams tucked away. I wasn't ashamed of my job, not at first, but when your own mother, the person who is supposed to love you unconditionally, tells you she's ashamed of who you are, it's hard to look at yourself the same way. What made it worse was that this wasn't the first time I had been made to feel small. Growing up, I had always tried to please her, to meet her impossible standards. But nothing ever seemed good enough. The scholarships I earned, the awards, the opportunities that were handed, to me none of it mattered. All she ever saw was the small, insignificant part of me that hadn't quite made it to the top. I stood there in that crowded restaurant, my face burning with humiliation, trying to force myself to breathe. I wanted to run, to disappear. But, instead, I stood frozen, the words sinking deeper into my soul. This was the moment when everything started to unravel. The people around me went back to their meals, their conversations resuming like nothing had happened, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the ground had shifted beneath me. This wasn't just an insult, it was the culmination of years of emotional neglect, of striving for approval that was never going to come. As I stood there, feeling invisible, I realized I had a choice. I could continue to let this define me, or I could choose to change everything. I didn't know how I would do it, or what it would look like, but one thing was clear. I couldn't keep living this way. I couldn't keep letting her define me. The question burned in my mind. Will I choose to stay silent, or will I take control of my own story? The humiliation in that moment wasn't the first, nor was it the last. Looking back, it's almost like a series of small betrayals, hidden in plain sight. Each one felt like a cut that didn't quite heal, leaving an invisible scar that I carried without realizing it at the time. My mother's words, sharp and cruel, were like the final blow. But it wasn't the only wound. There were the smaller moments, the ones that went unnoticed by others but weighed heavy on my heart. I remember the time she called me out for my lack of ambition in front of my sister, like I was nothing but a disappointment. Her judgment wasn't just an isolated incident, it was a pattern, subtle but relentless. And then there was the day my best friend from high school, Sarah, came into the diner where I worked. We hadn't spoken in months, and when she saw me behind the counter, her expression faltered. I tried to brush it off, but there was something in her eyes that said everything. She was embarrassed to be seen with me. It was as if my life was no longer hers to be part of, and that stung more than any insult could. Sarah, the one person I thought would always be there, had slipped away the moment I had been stuck in the same place for too long. I never confronted Sarah about it. I was afraid. Afraid of hearing the truth, that I wasn't good enough, that I hadn't moved forward in the ways I was supposed to. The truth was, I had been trying to survive, to get by, but I never seemed to be moving. And I wondered if, deep down, they all saw it too. Did they pity me? Did they see me as someone who hadn't amounted to anything? It was these moments, ones you don't talk about, the ones that you sweep under the rug, that start to pile up. You bury them, thinking they don't matter, but then one day, you realize they've become a part of you. Each betrayal, no matter how small, chips away at your sense of worth. You start to believe you're not enough, that you'll never be enough. But the worst betrayal, the one that still haunts me, came from my own heart. I had let them define me. I had allowed their judgments, their dismissals, to shape the way I saw myself. I had convinced myself that I was not worthy of more, that this life, this small, unnoticed life, was all I deserved. I had become my own worst enemy, constantly seeking validation from others while neglecting the voice inside me that said I deserved better. As the days passed after that moment with my mother, I couldn't help but reflect on these hidden wounds. Each one had left a mark, but I had ignored them for so long. Now, they were bubbling to the surface, demanding to be acknowledged. Can I confront these hidden wounds, or will they remain buried forever? Can I find the strength to face them head-on, or will they continue to haunt me? The decision to change didn't come overnight. It wasn't a single moment where everything clicked into place. No, it was a slow, painful realization that I couldn't keep living for other people. I had spent my whole life waiting for validation, for approval, for someone else to tell me that I was worth something. But after the incident with my mother, I was done. Done with being small. Done with living in the shadow of others' expectations. I could feel something shifting within me. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was there quietly rumbling beneath the surface. For the first time in years, I felt something other than the ache of self-doubt. It was a flicker of hope. A spark of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in ages. Empowerment. As I stood in the diner that night, wiping down tables and watching people go about their lives, I realized I was tired of watching everyone else live their dreams while I remained stuck. I was tired of hiding behind my apron, making small talk with strangers, and pretending that this was all I could be. But I wasn't sure where to start. How do you change when you don't even know where to begin? For years, I had been so consumed by fear and self-loathing that I had stopped asking myself what I really wanted. My dreams had been tucked away so deep that I had forgotten how to even reach for them. Then it hit me. What if I started small? What if I started by believing in myself just a little bit more? I didn't have to change everything overnight. But I had to take the first step, and that step was going to be hard. It was going to be uncomfortable, but it was the only way to reclaim my life. I needed to stop being passive. I needed to stop waiting for someone else to give me permission to be who I was meant to be. That was the first realization. I was the one holding myself back. The next step was facing the people who had made me feel small, the people who had planted those seeds of doubt in my mind and let them grow into something toxic. I didn't know if I could confront them yet, if I was ready. But the idea of finally standing up for myself, of not letting anyone dictate my worth, started to feel like the only option. I didn't know how it would play out, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to remain silent. I wasn't going to let my mother's words, or Sarah's indifference, or anyone else's expectations control me anymore. I had spent so much of my life bending to their will, trying to make them proud. But now, I realized, the only person I needed to make proud was me. Would I find the courage to change, or would I hesitate when it mattered most? The moment I decided to take control, it was like a switch flipped in my mind. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to life, was planning my next move. I had spent so long allowing others to shape my narrative, but now I had my own story to tell. The question was, how would I do it? How would I confront the people who had stolen my peace, my sense of self, and turn the tide of my own life? I wasn't naive. I knew I couldn't just walk up to my mother and demand respect. I knew I couldn't go back to Sarah and expect everything to be okay. But what I could do was take control of my environment, my work, and, most importantly, myself. I needed to rebuild, not just from the outside, but from the inside. I spent the next few weeks quietly plotting. Each step was deliberate, calculated, nothing too obvious, nothing too rash. I didn't want to burn bridges, but I also didn't want to keep pretending that everything was fine. I had spent so many years suppressing my feelings and letting others get away with treating me poorly. That time was over. First, I started with my job. The diner had been a safety net for me, a place where I could disappear into the background and forget about the world. But I had grown resentful of it, and the people who patronized it. Every shift felt like another reminder of the person I wasn't becoming. I wanted more. I had the potential to be more. And if I was going to take control of my life, it had to start here. I began to apply for new jobs, jobs that would challenge me, jobs that would push me out of my comfort zone. But this wasn't just about changing careers. This was about proving to myself that I could do it. I could change my circumstances, even if no one else believed in me. Next, I turned my attention to my mother. I wasn't going to confront her with anger or bitterness. No, I knew better than that. Instead, I would let her see me for who I had become. I would stop seeking her approval, stop waiting for her validation. If she was ashamed of me, so be it. But I would no longer allow her words to define my worth. I would show her that I was strong enough to stand on my own, without needing her approval. And then there was Sarah. That was a harder decision. I didn't want to burn bridges, But I also didn't want to continue pretending that everything was fine between us. Our friendship had been fractured, and it was time to face the truth. She wasn't the friend I thought she was. She hadn't stood by me when I needed her most. I had given so much of myself to others, but it had never been reciprocated. I had allowed myself to be used, to be invisible, and I was done. The plan was coming together. Every small decision, every action, was taking me closer to reclaiming my life. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew there would be moments of doubt, moments where I'd second-guess myself. But there was something inside me that told me this was the right path. Would my plan unfold as I expected? Would these small acts of defiance lead to the sense of victory I craved? Or would unforeseen obstacles leave me questioning everything? The day I decided to execute my plan, I felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. My heart raced as I stepped into the diner for another shift. But this time, something was different. I wasn't just a waitress anymore. I was someone who was taking control, someone who knew exactly what they were worth. I had already handed in my resignation letter for the diner, knowing it was time for me to move on. But the confrontation with my mother, the one I had been avoiding for years, was still looming over me. I knew it had to happen sooner or later. I couldn't keep letting her words control me. It was time to show her who I really was, and maybe, just maybe, she'd finally see me for the person I had become. Not the person she had always expected me to be. It wasn't as dramatic as I had imagined it. I didn't storm in and yell at her, demanding an apology or her approval. Instead, I waited for a quiet moment when she and I were alone. There was no audience, no one to witness the emotional fireworks I had once imagined. Just the two of us, finally face to face with the truth. "Mom," I began, my voice steady, though my stomach was in knots. "I need to tell you something." She didn't look up from her phone at first, but then she met my gaze. I could see the skepticism in her eyes. She was waiting for me to apologize, waiting for me to admit I was wrong, that I had been lazy, that I was the disappointment she had always accused me of being. But that wasn't what I said. "I'm not the person you want me to be. I've never been that person. I've spent my whole life trying to make you proud, trying to meet your standards. But I can't do that anymore. I'm done." I watched her face flicker with confusion, maybe even a little hurt. But it wasn't the kind of reaction I expected. She didn't fight back immediately. Instead, she just stared at me, her silence more cutting than any words she could have said. "I'm not ashamed of what I do, and I won't let you make me feel ashamed of myself anymore." There was a long pause, the tension hanging in the air like a storm cloud. I expected her to yell at me, to make me feel small again, but instead, she sighed. She stood up slowly, the weight of her years of disappointment pressing down on her shoulders. "I don't know what you want me to say," she murmured, her voice soft, almost fragile. "I'm just worried you'll never get ahead. I don't want you to be stuck forever." "I'm not stuck," I said, my voice quieter now, but filled with conviction. "I'm just changing. And I need you to respect that." She didn't respond immediately, but I didn't need her to. The words had been said. The truth had been laid out on the table, and it was no longer in her hands. Whether she accepted it or not, I had made my peace with myself. The conversation with my mother wasn't a victory in the way I had imagined, but it was enough. I had reclaimed my voice. I had stood up for myself, and for the first time in my life, I didn't need her approval to feel validated. Then came Sarah. The phone call was inevitable. I hadn't spoken to her in weeks, not since I had seen that look in her eyes at the diner. But I needed to know the truth. I couldn't go on pretending that nothing had changed between us. When she picked up, there was an awkward silence on the other end of the line. I could tell she knew why I was calling, and the hesitation in her voice made my stomach turn. She knew everything. "Charlotte, she started. But I cut her off. "I need you to be honest with me, Sarah. Why haven't you been there? Why did you let me go on thinking everything was fine when I was drowning in this, loneliness?" She was quiet for a moment, and when she finally spoke, I could hear the guilt in her voice. "I don't know. I guess I just, I didn't know how to be there for you. You were always so strong, always so independent. I thought you didn't need me." The words hit me harder than I expected. Sarah hadn't been the friend I thought she was. She hadn't been there when I needed her most, and I had been too blind to see it. "I needed you," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "But you weren't there. And I can't keep pretending that doesn't matter." The conversation ended without any big resolution. There were no dramatic apologies, no emotional outpourings. But I realized, in that moment, that maybe Sarah and I were just two different people now. And maybe that was okay. Was I satisfied with the confrontations? Was there relief? Or was there still a nagging emptiness? In the end, I wasn't sure, but one thing was clear. I had taken action. I had stood up for myself, and though it wasn't the grand catharsis I had once dreamed of, it was enough. The days that followed my confrontations with my mother and Sarah were a whirlwind. On the outside, nothing had changed. I still worked the same job, still lived in the same small apartment, but inside, it felt like the ground beneath me had shifted in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. I had taken control. I had made my voice heard, but did it feel like the victory I thought it would be? Was I really at peace with everything I had said and done? The truth was, I felt a strange emptiness. Like a hole that was left behind after a storm had passed, leaving me to sort through the wreckage. My mother hadn't reacted the way I had hoped. She hadn't broken down in tears or apologized. She had simply nodded, said she was worried about me, and that was it. There was no grand catharsis, no moment of understanding between us and Sarah. She hadn't fought for our friendship the way I had hoped. There was no heartfelt apology, no desperate plea for me to come back into her life. Instead, there was a quiet, almost sad acceptance of the distance that had grown between us. The conversation with her had been a wake-up call, one that made me realize that sometimes, people just grow apart. And as much as I wished things could go back to the way they were, I knew deep down that they never would. The problem with revenge, whether it's against the people who hurt you or the world you feel trapped in, is that you can never fully prepare yourself for the aftermath. I thought that once I stood up for myself, once I reclaimed my voice, I would feel free. But freedom doesn't come from confronting others, it comes from within. And that was the hardest lesson of all. I spent nights lying awake, wrestling with my thoughts. Did I feel empowered? Some days, yes, I did. But on other days, the weight of the choices I had made, the hurt I had caused, and the emotional toll of those confrontations settled heavily in my chest. I couldn't deny that there were moments of guilt, moments where I questioned whether I had done the right thing. I had waited so long for a sense of closure, but now I wasn't sure if it had truly come. Had revenge really healed me? Or had it only opened up more wounds that I wasn't ready to face? I knew one thing for certain: the pain of betrayal didn't magically vanish when I confronted the people who had wronged me. There was no magic moment of closure that I had imagined. Instead, it was a long, messy process of untangling the hurt and figuring out how to move forward. The internal conflict I felt was exhausting. I wasn't sure if revenge had truly given me peace, or if I was simply left with more questions than answers. But as I sat with these feelings, I also realized something important. This journey wasn't just about what others had done to me. It was about what I had done to myself. I had let their words, their actions, shape my identity for far too long. I had believed the lies they told me, the judgments they passed on me, and in doing so, I had abandoned the person I was meant to be. Now, I had to face the truth. No one could give me the closure I was seeking. Only I could do that, and so, I began the slow process of healing, not from what others had done to me, but from what I had allowed myself to believe about who I was. I had to stop looking to others for validation. I had to stop waiting for apologies, for acknowledgement. I had to learn to validate myself, to forgive myself for the years I had spent in self-doubt. I didn't have all the answers yet. I didn't know if revenge had truly set me free, or if I was still tangled in the web of my past. But I did know this: I had started a journey. And this journey, no matter how painful, was the only way forward. Had I found peace after the confrontation? Not yet. But was I ready to keep going? To keep seeking the answers I needed? Yes. It's strange, the way life works. You spend so much time fighting battles you think will define you, thinking that once they're over, you'll finally be free. But then, when the dust settles, you realize that the battle wasn't with them, it was with yourself. The real victory doesn't come from confronting those who hurt you. It comes from realizing that you are worthy of peace, of respect, of love, no matter what anyone else thinks. Over the weeks that followed the confrontation, I kept thinking back to those moments, standing in front of my mother, speaking my truth, for the first time, and on the phone with Sarah, calling out the distance that had crept into our friendship. I realized now that those weren't the defining moments I had imagined. The true defining moment had come when I started forgiving myself, when I began letting go of the past and understanding that my worth wasn't tied to what others thought of me. It was easy to get lost in the weight of other people's expectations. To think that if I just made them proud, everything would fall into place. But I was wrong. The power wasn't in them. The power was always in me. I had been waiting for them to see me, to recognize me, but I hadn't been seeing myself, and so, I stopped waiting. I stopped looking to the past for the answers I needed. I started setting goals for myself, ones that were for me, not for anyone else. I enrolled in a culinary school, a dream I had buried under years of self-doubt and fear of failure. I had always loved cooking, but I had convinced myself that it wasn't a career for someone like me. Someone who had spent their life trying to meet everyone else's expectations. But now, I realized, it didn't matter if they understood. It didn't matter if my mother approved or Sarah came back into my life. I was ready to build a future for myself. I was ready to be the person I had always wanted to be, no longer constrained by the people or circumstances that had tried to define me. I wasn't the person my mother had imagined, the successful, high-powered woman she had hoped for. But I wasn't a waitress anymore either. I was Charlotte, the woman who had chosen to live on her own terms, the woman who had the strength to stand up for herself, to embrace her flaws and her dreams, and to carve out a path that was uniquely her own. There were moments of doubt, of course. There always would be. I was still healing from the wounds of my past, still learning how to let go of the things I couldn't control, but I had something I hadn't had before. Belief. Belief in myself. And with that belief came a sense of empowerment I had never known. I realized now that true empowerment didn't come from revenge. It didn't come from proving other people wrong. It came from choosing to live for yourself. It came from understanding that your worth is inherent, that it's not something someone else can give or take away. It's something you claim for yourself, no matter where you've been or what you've endured. And as I looked at the future, I didn't see uncertainty. I saw possibility. I saw a life that was waiting for me to step into it, a life that was mine to shape and define. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but it was mine. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. This was the true closure I had been searching for all along, not in the apology I never received, not in the validation I had always longed for. It was in the realization that I had the power to create my own happiness, to be my own source of strength. And with that, I knew that I was ready for the next chapter. The one where I finally let go of my past and fully embraced my future.